Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Anne and today I'm giving you my March wrap-up. It is currently the 16th of April, so I'm pretty late with filming this wrap-up, but that's mostly to do with the fact that I got a little bit ill at the start of April. I was planning on filming this video and another video in the first weekend of April, but then I had this terrible cold. So not only did I really not feel like filming it and just feel like lying on the couch all day, I also sounded pretty gross, so no one would have liked to have seen that. So I'm doing it now, much later. I have to say that the beginning of March feels like 3 months ago now. It feels like such a long time ago that I read these books, or at least the books that I read at the beginning of the month. I'm looking at my reading journal here. But I did have a really good reading month. I finished 7 books and I DNF'd 1 book because I didn't like it after about 100 pages, but the books that I did finish, apart from one of them, I really liked all of them. And I also participated in the Magical Readathon Gear Up, Aurelium Gear Up Readathon, and it was aimed at doing the last preparation for the big Magical Readathon that is happening in April right now, which I am also participating in. So without further ado, let's just get into it. The first book in March was already a banger. If this doesn't end up in my top 3 favorite books of the year, I don't know what happened. I will have read a lot of really amazing books after this one, because right now I think it's my favorite book of the year so far, and it is A Psalm for the Wild Bills by Becky Chambers. Those of you who've been watching this channel for a while now, or even for a little while, will know that Becky Chambers is one of my favorite authors. Her Wayfarer series is my favorite series of all time, and I was a little bit apprehensive about reading this book because this is the first book in a new series after the Wayfarer series ended last year, and I was a little scared that the magic of Becky Chambers would be isolated to the Wayfarer series for me. But luckily, like I said, that wasn't the case at all. I absolutely adored this. I also read this for a prompt for the Magical Readathon for the preparation prompts. This was for one of the character prompts, the background prompt. And because my character is a wilding character instead of an urban character, I had to read a book that was mostly set outside or mostly set in a forest. And I wasn't sure before going in if that would be the case for this one, but I think it was completely set outside. Like I said, this is the first book in a new series. It is a novella. It is not even 200 pages long, I think, and it is a sci-fi story about a bit of a utopian world, which feels like it might be Becky Chambers' hopes for our world. This used to be a world like ours where there used to be lots of machines, there used to be lots of mass production, and that had certain effects on the climate and on the world itself, just like it does in our world. But in this world, people saw the light at some point and they realized that things couldn't go on the way that they did. But a big part of the history of this world is also that the robots that used to work for the humans gained self-awareness, and they decided they didn't want to work for humans anymore, and they set off into the wilderness to start a society of their own. But they did make a promise that at some point they would come back. They promised to check in to see how things were going. And that's what happens in this book. We follow a tea monk in this book. I've forgotten their name. They're a non-binary character, Dex. Their name is Dex, and in this world a tea monk is someone who travels around the world, stopping here and there to serve tea to the people who need it and to listen to their problems and to serve them the exact right blend of tea, which kind of reminded me of Chocolat by Joanne Harris a little bit. So they're serving tea, but it's kind of a mental health thing as well. And Dex becomes a really good tea monk. They become kind of renowned around the world for their services, but then their life is upended at some point when they run. That's Tommy. I'm not sure what he wants, but he's meowing, which he does occasionally. What's wrong? Do you want to say hi to the people? Okay, he's now on my lap. Come, say hi. 1, 2. Hello! Anyway, Dex's life as a tea monk is upended one day when he is approached by a robot named Mosscap. And this is a very special occurrence because no human has encountered a robot in centuries, and Mosscap has been tasked by the other robots to fulfill the old promise of checking in. And that's basically what this story is about. It's about Dex, it's about kind of figuring out this world as a reader. It's about their relationship with Mosscap and both of them trying to figure out each other's cultures. It's quite philosophical. It's exactly what I love in Becky Chambers' stories. She is such an amazing writer. There's something about her writing style that instantly soothes me. As soon as I open a book by her and as soon as I read the first page, I just feel calmer. Her descriptions of nature, as well as descriptions of man-made structures, or human-made structures I should say, are exquisite as well. And not a lot happens in her story. It's more about these characters, about their journeys of self-discovery, about culture, about humanity, about what it means to be alive, to have awareness. And I'm really looking forward to the second novella in this series, which should be published around July. So yeah, great start to the month. New favorite book. I absolutely adored it. It made me hopeful for the future. It made me hopeful about literature. It made me hopeful about my own writing. It was just amazing. Then you might remember that in February I did a lot of rereading and I reread part of the Lunar Chronicles, and I was still in the middle of Cress by Marissa Meyer, which is the third book of the Lunar Chronicles. And in March I finished it. As I said in my February wrap-up, I was starting to get a little bit bored. Bored is not the right word. I was not as interested, not as invested and intrigued in this book as I was in the first two books. Cinder and Scarlet were so much fun to reread. I rushed through them. I absolutely adored being back with the characters. It was nostalgic, it was exciting. It was just a great time altogether. And this was still nostalgic and it was also kind of exciting, but it also felt very repetitive, both in terms of things that happened within the book as in terms of things that happened within the series, so within the first two books. I came to realize that I like Cress less as a character than I do Cinder and Scarlet. Cress is based on Rapunzel. For those of you who don't know, the Lunar Chronicles is a series of 4 books that are all retellings of fairy tales. So Cinder is Cinderella, Scarlet is Little Red Riding Hood, Cress is Rapunzel, and the 4th book, Winter, is Snow White. And they are sci-fi retellings. I'm not going to go into the entire story because I explained that in detail in my February wrap-up. So if you're intrigued and you want to know more, I recommend watching that one. But Cress is the 3rd book. It's a lot bigger than the first 2 books. And a lot does happen in it. And by the end it did get more exciting again. But there were parts within this book that just seemed to drag a little bit more. I still gave it 4 stars because it is nostalgic and I love this series so much. But I was also looking forward to finishing it, and I have not picked up Winter yet, just because I needed a bit of a break of this series after the 3rd book. I really do hope that I pick up Winter soon, because I don't want to read the first 3 books in quick succession, one after another, and then just not pick up the 4th book at all anymore. I do want to read it at some point in the near future. Next up, there's the book that I did finish but really didn't like, and it was Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. I read this book for the Magical Readathon as well, and also for my character. One of the character prompts was to establish which province you're from within the world of the Magical Readathon, and I decided on the province of Etheria, and for that prompt I had to read a book with Fae or Elven characters in it, and I realized that I didn't really own a book with Fae or Elven characters in it, and I didn't really feel like picking up another book, but I figured Tinkerbell would fit for this one. Tinkerbell is a fairy. So I finally read Peter Pan, which has been on my shelves for quite a long time. This is of course a children's classic, and it has been adapted into so many great stories, both films and other books. It is a book that is very well suited for retellings and adaptations. But as the story itself, as the source material, it is very outdated. It isn't fit for modern audiences anymore, I think. I know there are some people who really do enjoy it, but I think it was incredibly racist, incredibly sexist. It was quite boring as well. The story just wasn't very exciting. I was also very curious whether J.M. Barrie sees Peter Pan as the hero within this story, or if he actually kind of wrote him as a villain, because I don't think Peter Pan is a good guy. I think he was definitely the villain within this story. When I started reading this, I was kind of interested. I thought the writing style was whimsical and light, and I enjoyed it, but my interest and my excitement soon waned when the racism started and when the sexism and misogyny started. It's definitely just a product of its time. I ended up giving it 2 stars just because I do think that it is great source material for modern adaptations that do not include the racism and the sexism. This as a story itself, it was not a fun time. The next book I read was another one for the Magical Readathon, for the Aurelium Gear Up Readathon, and I read a book for my legacy. For my legacy I chose Austra, the God of Dawn and New Beginnings, and for this I needed to read the first book in a series. And I decided to read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, which is a book I've been interested in and intrigued by for a very long time, because everybody seems to love this book. I ended up really enjoying it. I gave it 3.75 stars. So not the full 4 stars, definitely not the full 5 stars. I thought it was a fun story, it was an interesting story, but I did miss some things. I thought it was kind of lacking here and there. For those of you who don't know, this is a book about Pip, who decides for her school project to delve into the unsolved disappearance of a girl who went to her high school about 5 years ago, I think. She disappeared, and everyone has always assumed that her boyfriend, Sal Singh, murdered her, because Sal killed himself before his innocence or his guilt could be proven. And Pip has always thought that there was something wrong with this story, that there was something that didn't fit, and she also believes that Sal Singh was innocent. And with the help of Sal's brother, she delves into this mystery. I had a really good time reading this. This was just one of those books that was kind of unputdownable. I really wanted to continue reading, I wanted to find out what happened next, but it all felt quite surface level to me. I liked Pip as a main character, I thought she was interesting, and I liked her dynamic with Ravi, who is the brother. And I really liked her family as well. I always love it when a family is really present in a YA novel, and when it isn't a problematic family, it's just a nice family home base. I really enjoyed that, but I did think the characters were not as well developed as they could have been, especially her friends. And although I was invested in the mystery and I had no clue what happened, I really didn't guess how this would end, I was kind of dissatisfied by the ending. I didn't like the big reveal, and I just was left with a sense of disappointment, basically. I would have liked there to have been a bit more discussion and criticism of the justice system, which really at the start of the book it seems like there will be more criticism or more commentary or just more discussion about this, because it seems like it also will be a discussion about racism, but I felt it was a bit lacking in that area, which is of course a choice you can make as an author, which is fine, but to me it was a little bit disappointing. But my main reason for not rating this higher was the writing. I didn't think the writing was very good. I thought there was some strange uses of metaphors and similes that took me out of the writing a little bit, out of the story. Some of the metaphors and similes were just a bit weird, and I didn't really feel like they fit within the story. So that was a bit of a bummer. I do want to read book 2 and 3 in this series at some point, because I am excited to see what Pip will get up to next. But I don't think I will be buying the books. When I really like a book, I really want to buy the sequels, but for this one I'll be fine just borrowing them from the library. So that's also a sign that this wasn't really a 4 or 5 star read for me, but I did really enjoy my reading experience of this one. Next up we've got the book I DNF'd, and I was really disappointed by this one. I really wanted to like this one, and I had really thought I would love this one, and it was The Cat Who Saved Books by Sosuke Natsukawa. This is a book by a Japanese author, it's translated fiction, and it's about a bookstore, Natsuki Books. It's about a boy called Rintaro, and he used to live with his grandfather, who was the owner and proprietor of Natsuki Books, but his grandfather dies at the start of the story. The bookstore will most likely be sold, and Rintaro is really sad about this, of course, and he spends a lot of time in the bookstore. He stops going to school, and then a talking cat shows up who says he has to go with him to save books. And so they go on certain adventures. They go through a portal to other places in the world, and then Rintaro has to help the cat save books, is the idea. I don't know how it ends. I haven't finished it. I think I stopped reading at about 100 pages. I was just really annoyed at this book. I didn't connect with the characters at all. I didn't like any of them, especially not the cat. I didn't care for the story. I thought it was very elitist in the way it talked about how reading should be done, what is correct and good reading, and what is a wrong way to read or a wrong way to treat your books. I'm really not about that. Just do whatever you want when it comes to reading. It's a hobby, it's something to do for fun, it's something to learn something. It's not something we should police in any way. I don't know if that is talked about, if that is resolved in the end, if the lesson might just be we should just let anyone do whatever they want. But I don't think that was the ending. Of course, I don't know, I didn't finish it. But it really felt like this book just really felt very strongly about the way reading should be done. And as if that wasn't enough, I also didn't like the writing. I thought it was flat, it was clunky, the dialogues were unnatural and unbelievable. So yeah. This one wasn't for me, and I won't be picking it up again. That did mean, however, that I needed to pick out a new book for the Magical Readathon, because I was reading that one for my conduit. For my conduit, I chose a spell book, and for that prompt I needed to read a book with 2 or more S's in the title, and The Cat Who Saved Books had 2 of them, but because I didn't finish it, I had to go on the search for a new book. And I decided that this was the perfect time to reread a book I first read in 2020 and absolutely loved, and it was These Witches Don't Burn by Isabel Sterling. This is the first in a duology, and there is also a short story or novella, you could say, in between these books. It's kind of a prequel novella. This is a story about Hannah, who is an elemental witch. She lives in Salem, Massachusetts, and she is part of a coven, just like her parents, because magic is hereditary in this book, and just like her ex-girlfriend, Veronica, who she had a very messy breakup with. Her best friend doesn't know she is a witch, because witches are sworn to secrecy because they don't want anything like the witch hunts from the past to happen again. The first rule of Witch Club is you don't talk about Witch Club, basically. So this is basically a kind of a fantasy novel, but it's set in a contemporary world. There's just witches. Hannah is really struggling with this breakup, but then strange signs of magic start to appear around town, and she starts to get really worried that a blood witch might be in town and that she is in danger. The coven is put on high alert as well when more serious things start to happen, and it basically becomes about survival. So this summer before school starts to become very stressful. In the meantime, Hannah has also met a new girl she's very interested in, who's called Morgan, and she also works in a shop selling witchy stuff, but just the usual witchy stuff you'd find in Salem, Massachusetts, not the real witchy stuff. And this book is just, there's something about it that makes me so happy. I think when I first read it, I gave it 4 stars, but I now gave it the full 5 stars, and I was completely convinced about that, even before going in, really. Because this is one of those books that I first read as a palate cleanser. I thought it was a fun book to quickly get through and to enjoy but then forget about again. But it also turned out to be one of those books that I kept thinking about, that I look back on with very fond memories. I just had such a good time rereading this. It was so much fun. I really love the writing style, I love the characters, I love the dialogue. I love the story. I love the idea of these elemental witches living in Salem, Massachusetts. It's very well done, the magic system as well. I think it's believable. It feels like it could just happen within our world, and I really enjoyed it. So those were all the books for the Magical Readathon, but this wrap-up doesn't end there because I read more than that. The next book I read was my most anticipated release of the year so far, because the new Becky Chambers book is of course also a very highly anticipated release, but this one also was. It's of course Gallant by V.E. Schwab. V.E. Schwab is one of my favorite authors, and I was really looking forward to this book. This is a YA standalone novel about Olivia. Olivia is non-verbal, and she lives in an orphanage with lots of other girls who really don't like her. She's bullied a lot, partly because she cannot speak. She just doesn't have a very fun life. She doesn't know anything about her parents. The only thing she has of her mother is her old diary. But it's very clear from reading this diary that her mother wasn't very mentally well towards the end of her life, because the later diary entries don't make a lot of sense. And Olivia basically devotes her free time to just reading this diary over and over again and trying to find out who her mother was, what is in her past, who Olivia herself is. And then one day the orphanage gets a letter from Olivia's uncle inviting her to come live at his large estate called Gallant and to be with family. And of course Olivia is very excited to go, and she does go, but she also feels a certain sense of trepidation because her mother wrote in her diary, in the letter she wrote to Olivia, on the very last page, that Olivia will be fine and she will be safe as long as she doesn't go to Gallant. So that's very ominous, and for a reason, because Olivia arrives at Gallant and she realizes that things are very different than she'd expected. She doesn't arrive upon a very happy family, she arrives upon a very strange house that obviously has its secrets. And this is a story about darkness, about dreams, about death, about ghouls. I gave it 5 stars, I absolutely adored it. This was the perfect story for me, I think. I didn't realize it was going to be about dreams, and as you might know, I love any story about dreams, so that was a very pleasant surprise. I also fell in love with the writing style. It was even more eerie and eloquent and beautiful than usual for V.E. Schwab, it almost seems like. And I think this book won't be for everyone, but it certainly was for me, and I absolutely loved it. And I also read this for the Buzzword Reading Challenge because the prompt for March was to read a book with a location in the title. And Gallant is an estate, so it's a location, so that fits as well. And then there's one more book that I finished, and it was the audiobook that I already started in February for my rereading month, and it was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This was obviously a reread for me. This is one of my all-time favorite books, and I hadn't read it in a couple of years, so it was so much fun to listen to it again. Wuthering Heights has a very special place in my heart because it is the book that kind of set me on the path towards English literature, towards loving English books. It feels like one of the most significant books in my life. It feels like it kind of shaped my life in a sense, because of this book I went to study English literature. I became the person who I am today. I met the friends, most of the friends that I have today. Because of that, I will always be very grateful to it. I don't know if I would love it as much as I do if I'd first read it now, because the story is about terrible characters who do terrible things to each other, and it is quite tragic. It's not romantic at all, I think. I thought it was a little bit romantic when I was 16 and I read it first, but now I know that this has nothing to do with romance. I don't know what Emily Bronte's intention with the book was. I don't know if that really matters, but I do know that I read it now as just a tragic story about characters who are dealt a very rough hand in life, who become villainous because of it. For some people, Heathcliff, and others who go about it in a very different way. I think there are great character studies within this book. I think it is very well written. I was very impressed again with the structure of this book, how it is told within the frame narrative that works really, really well. I think this might be the best example of a frame narrative I've come across. I can't think of one that's done better than this. I really like Nellie Dean as the narrator of this story, and sometimes with frame narratives it can feel kind of clunky, kind of artificial, but with this it feels very natural. It feels very well woven together, the now and the past, and the way that Nellie Dean tells the story. She's an exquisite storyteller, just like Emily Bronte, of course. I also think that Nellie Dean is pretty much the only likable character within this story, if there are any likable characters, because even she has her flaws. But to have her tell the story, to have the most rational, the most down-to-earth person tell the story of these very passionate people, I thought that is very well done. And of course, I gave this 5 stars. And that's it. Those were all the books that I read in March. I hope you enjoyed this video. In a comment, please let me know what was your favorite book you read in March. I think mine was definitely A Psalm for the Wild-Built, but Gallant is a close second. That one will definitely also be in my top 10 of favorite books at the end of the year, I think. It was just overall a great reading month, so I'm really happy about that. Please like this video if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of me in the future. And have a wonderful day. Bye!